Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to The View Up Here. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is April 11th, 2018. Tonight, a man who talks about politics and society every day, every weekday on radio. I just do it once a week. He does it every weekday. Dave Glover from Northumberland 89.7 is back. And here comes the Ontario election. Imagine the possibilities. Now, I know that sounds like kind of a Alice in Wonderland terminology. I'll imagine the possibilities. But really, the more you look at it, the more it could get a lot worse, maybe get a lot better, maybe stay the same. Whatever. But the budgets come down. It won't be long before the legislature is dissolved. The election rate will drop, and then it's full scale. What are we seeing so far? Did the Ontario budget decide how this campaign is going to be fought? We'll discuss this and a few other things. But I'll just say it's been one hell of a week for me. Happy to get on the air. Didn't think it was going to happen, but I'm here now. It's enough of the intro tune. It's time to bring on our guest. Good evening, Dave.
Hey, Glenn. How you doing today, man?
Oh, I'm just happy to be here. What can I say?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've had a real nightmare of an issue. You did a computer upgrade, I understand, and at that point, the wheels kind of fell off the trolley.
Well,
so we're glad to have you up.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've had quite a few problems in the last little while. This one was actually not something I did, which is a break from the previous pattern. This was a Microsoft update that gave me a blue screen. Thank you very much, Microsoft.
Nice.
And yeah, it was a long night last night. Let's put it that way. But here we are. We're ready to go. Now, like I said, I know on your show, you've had some very, shall we say, connected or skin in the game people in this upcoming election on your show.
Yes.
Specifically for your riding as well, but what's been the discussion so far at the local level of Northumberland?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I've talked to a lot of conservatives. They were kind of hoping that we were a big Christine Elliott riding. A lot of people were hoping Christine Elliott would be the new leader. We're kind of a bellwether riding as well. I mean, we've had our conservatives, we've had our liberals. It tends to be when the liberals are going to come in, all of a sudden we got a liberal candidate who's solid, and that person gets elected. With the conservatives, I mean, our last conservative member was the party whip, Doug Galt. He managed to get us a hospital here, which contrary to what a lot of people locally would think, he had to fight. He put his political career on the line to get us that hospital. The premier of the day didn't even want to build the hospital, even after we raised the money. So we've got a lot of conservatives, a lot of liberals. We're starting to see more NDP coming out of the woodwork. But for the most part, at this point, I think the overwhelming support is still for our current member of provincial parliament, who is Lou Rinaldi, who is a Liberal. But the other thing, too, for us, Glenn, is that our riding has just changed. They've just redone the boundaries. They redid them federally just after the last federal election. And, of course, now we are going to be aligning, because the province likes to do that. They like to align the ridings with the federal riding.
Yeah.
So this is the first election. So we're no longer Northumberland Quinte West. We're now Northumberland Peterborough South. So there are a couple of areas to the east and to a little bit north of us that were part of Peterborough, for instance. The people in the east, or the west rather, were part of Durham. So those people are now having to be realigned with our riding as well. So there's been some changes, but I'm really happy to say I've had the progressive conservative candidate on our show. David Piccini is a very well-spoken man, a good candidate. We've had Lou Rinaldi. I have him on the show quite regularly because he's our sitting member. Mm-hmm. We have reached out to the NDP. We had the a Trillium Party candidate on my show. For your listeners out there that don't know what the Trillium Party is, they are sort of these people that consider themselves progressive conservatives. They are not conservative, if you will, big C conservatives. They're PCs, and they've split from the party. There's actually been a couple of riding associations that have left en masse to join the Trillium Party in Ontario. So now the Conservatives are seeing a bit of a splintering happening. So we've had him on the show as well. And we had Mike Schreiner, the Green Party president, was on the show about a month ago. So we've had some pretty big players. I've already reached out to Kathleen Wynne's team. They've advised me that as soon as she can, she'll be in the studio to sit down for an hour. Doug Ford's team has not responded yet, but I'm going to I've sent a message to him again today through our local candidate. So hopefully he'll be able to massage it so that I can get Doug into the studio. But for some reason, I don't think Doug's going to join my show.
Well, I can understand your opinion on that, but I mean, it sounds like there's, just from that, on that level even, it just sounds like there's definite different ways of campaigning this time. Like, not everybody's doing the same thing. Do you think this is going to be good or bad? Do you think it's going to be good or bad in your part of Ontario? Will it make a difference?
Well, I hope it makes a difference. I really do hope it makes a difference. We're seeing more people. We're going to get more exposure to the leaders out here. We are a rural part of the province. It's Eastern Ontario, sort of the farm. There's a farm belt out here as well. But, I mean, you know, outside of the urban centers, and you guys experience the same thing in Alberta, I'm sure. I mean, we have issues in the rural ridings that are only just sort of in the last few years kind of coming to a fore for the government. These are issues that have been around for generations, but, you know, it's taken forever for the urban members to realize that some of the things they're suffering through are also happening in rural Ontario, like homelessness, for instance, like mental health issues, access to or lack of access to. About homelessness and home security, I mean, when you mention to a member of parliament who represents a city riding, and you talk to them about homelessness, they're like, well, what are you talking about? There's no homelessness in rural Ontario. We just did a study in our riding, and there, I believe the number was 52 families that either are currently or at risk of being homeless in the immediate. And I mean, when you're talking about rural Ontario, I mean, that's a shock. But apparently it's not uncommon. It's just below the radar. That's the problem. So these people are couch surfing. These are people who are staying with family members till they can get a place. One of the other issues here, of course, is that rental costs have gone through the roof. Because we're so close to Toronto, we're an hour and a half away from downtown Toronto from my living room, okay? Because of that, a lot of people are leaving the city because it's expensive to live in the city, so they're selling their homes, getting $1 million for their homes, and then coming out to where I am or areas like mine and buying a place, and some of them will buy 2 places if they can. They'll rent it, but they rent for pretty much the same as you would pay in Toronto. That's what the rental rate is. So it's, you know, for me, I'm just glad because this is something that Lou Rinaldi, our member of provincial parliament, has been all over this issue since he's been elected. He's been in provincial parliament now since the Liberals were first elected here. He was out for that time period just before the last election. He was out for, I guess that was the 4-year time there, replaced by a Conservative, and then he's back. So, you know, again, issues of economic development. Again, beyond the cities, they don't really talk about these things. So we're starting to see more movement, and we're starting to see a lot more movement, especially as the government of the day realizes how important the 905 is, for instance, or the 519 outside of the 416, right? These are the people that vote.
Well, absolutely. Now, I think we can easily agree that the whole, what should I call it, script of proroguing the legislature just to force another throne speech to draw attention to the Liberal Party in their last days as government. I mean, they can use those tricks. I mean, the way I look at it is, at least with this prorogation, it wasn't to prevent a defeat of a government, and it wasn't to prevent the tabling of documents that would put the government in disrepute. It was merely public relations.
Well, and the other thing, I want to sort of cut you off. The other thing I want to add is so the Ledge finished business at 4:00 on the Friday. She prorogued Parliament that day, and they were back with a brand new throne speech on the Monday. So, I mean, from a government perspective, they had finished everything they said they were going to do. They were about to hand down a budget. They knew the budget was – now, again, they didn't have to prorogue Parliament, but they knew the budget was going to be a lead up to the election, right? So, I mean, I don't think it was unreasonable. Some people, as you just said a moment ago, some people would refer to it as a political trick. But the reality is, you know, they wanted to go into this next election – and I'm assuming this. I don't know for a fact because I'm not in the caucus. But they wanted to go into the election unfettered by anything that might be lingering from the previous session. So they prorogued Parliament. That puts full closure into anything that might be pending. And there were some interesting things pending. And then they introduced the budget, and then we move forward from that. So I think from a political standpoint, it was probably a good strategy. From a public policy standpoint, it was probably not a bad strategy either. I think it was probably a good idea, and also kind of washed the bad taste of prorogation out of people's mouths. She didn't prorogue for weeks. She didn't prorogue for 10 days or a month. She prorogued for a weekend.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know how the system works. I understand it. It wasn't unreasonable. It wasn't anything else. It's just that word. Yes, we know who to thank for that word. But the budget that did come down, if we talked about this another time, if you weren't a Canadian or an Ontarian and you just read that budget and the government went through what they've done and what they're going to do and how they're increasing this and increasing that, if you were a complete outsider, you'd probably say, wow, this is a decent government. Look at what they're going to do. But people in Ontario don't really have the same opinion, do they?
Well, I think, and people have asked me this, did I think this was going to be an election budget? Clearly it is an election budget. It's a budget that offers things. I mean, but here's the thing, and I want to point this out too, because even the Conservatives will admit this. This government was on an 8-week road trip across the province, talking to stakeholders, talking to corporations, talking to bankers, talking to other. It was an all-party committee that went across the province, talking to Ontarians about what they wanted to see in the upcoming budget. What did they want to see for fiscal year 2018-19? And they talked about things like pharmacare, and they talked about things like early childhood education and daycare. They talked about spending money on mental health and attacking the opioid crisis. They talked about how we're going to deal with legalization to cannabis. So all of these things that are in the budget now, okay, the additional spending on seniors, the tax breaks for seniors, the pharmacare for seniors, the pharmacare for people under 25. I mean, all of those things were discussed. They were considered by the all-party committee. The one thing they asked people consistently during this consultation is, do you care if we go into deficit in order to provide these programs? Are you saying you need these programs? These programs are something you want more than a balanced budget. And people said, look, interest rates are low right now. The debt to GDP ratio in this province is quite low right now. We have the lowest unemployment in generations. As a matter of fact, we have the lowest unemployment in Ontario since they started tracking unemployment numbers. Okay? So, I mean, we are in a good spot. The province decided through their consultations, and it was, as I say, an all-party committee that decided how they were going to do these consultations. They brought that report back to Stephen D'Souza. D'Souza looked at it and said, okay, look, people are saying to us, it's not a bad time to provide these programs. We can get ourselves back on the fiscal course within 5 years, but people want these programs. People want to know that the government is going to take care of them. I mean, don't forget, we've had 800,000 jobs brought back to the province since the Great Recession, okay? But a lot of those jobs are in the gig economy. They're part-time. Even the full-time jobs are still, in a lot of cases, contract work, right? So there is a lot of precarious employment. And what does precarious employment not provide? They don't provide benefits. They don't provide pharmacare. They don't provide dental. They don't provide things like income security. I mean, we're still doing a means test on a basic income study in this province, something that would go the way of the buggy whip if the Conservatives were elected or the NDP were elected, right? I mean, both of them have said pretty clearly. I mean, Doug Ford has said categorically he would cancel the basic income study. He thinks it's a waste of money. Andrea Horwath says it doesn't go far enough, so she would cancel the initial study and then put it province-wide, I think is what she is saying. So, I mean, what we're seeing is a budget that was based on consultations. So is it an election budget? I think a lot of people would say yes, definitely. I don't consider it an election budget. I consider it a budget whereby the province was – I mean, this was the same budget they would have handed down if an election weren't coming. That's the point I'm trying to make, Glenn. This is a budget that would have been handed down based on consultations, based on talking to stakeholders, talking to voters, talking to people who are in desperate situations. This is the provincial government that says, okay, we're listening to what you're saying. We know you're struggling. Hello? Are you still there, Glenn?
Me? Oh, you got me? There we go.
Okay, I got you. I got you now. I don't know if you're. Yeah, you're back.
No, yeah. Okay. Don't worry about it.
I don't know if you heard everything.
Yes, I did. I heard everything you said. You didn't hear what I said. That's all.
No, I didn't hear what you said.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, that's my fault.
Okay.
That's me being me this week. Now,
so, I know you've had a hell of a week. That's all I can say.
Julie Kazin in Maclean's came up with a pretty good bullet point list of the budget. Now, there's some small movement for low-income earners and social assistance recipients. I don't know how much some of this stuff's going to apply to them. The limits on savings in TFSAs and RSPs will be eliminated. Okay. But the amount of time that qualifies as living together for the definition of a spouse will change from 3 months to 3 years. So that will allow people to maintain their individual benefits. Employment income that can be earned without impacting social assistance benefits will increase to $400 from $200 a month. Continued cuts on residential electrical bills. Seniors get a new Healthy Home program, free prescription drugs for everyone 65 and over through OHIP Plus, free shingles vaccine, and for families, the new Ontario Drug and Dental Program that will reimburse 80% up to a maximum of $400 per single person, $600 per couple, and $700 for a family of 4 with 2 children. So that's going to make a difference to a lot of people. Free licensed childcare for preschool-age children. That's huge. College and university tuition free for more than 225,000 students. Expanding youth apprenticeship program. Net tuition billing will be introduced. Free online textbooks and resources. OSAP loan payments will be more flexible. It replaces the surtax and changes the tax brackets and the tax rates. And as an example, go ahead.
That's again. So you're going to get to the point there. That's primarily going to affect high income earners. And the other thing it's going to do is one of the tax breaks that you talked about there was a business thing, but they're also reducing small business taxes by a full %. So
it seems to me that if you want a government that's going to do something for you. Well, I mean, except for me because I'm a smoker and cigarette taxes are going up $4 a carton. But, you got to expect that. That's nothing new. But it looks to me like they're listening. This is what it says.
As far as Andrea Horwath is concerned, she says they may be listening, but they're not listening enough. Why are they waiting until now to listen? Again, you're going to get a lot of people out there saying, "Oh, this is a buy your vote budget." But if you look at the programs they're bringing in, and again, these were things they talked about in the last budget. Okay, a year ago they were saying, "Okay, when we get a balance or a surplus, these are the things we're going to be looking at." Now, some of the programs have been brought in a year or so earlier than they were going to be, but they're still programs they said they were going to bring in. So to just hurl the accusation that this is a buy your vote budget is garbage. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people that are working, a lot of people that are 24, just under 25 who are working, a lot of young mothers, single people who work in retail who are now going to be able to get prescription drugs for their kids because they couldn't before. Yeah. They're going to have access to, we have all day school here now. JKSK is a full day school at school. So realistically, daycare in this province starts at when you're 4 years old and you start school, right? We also have after-school programs that are funded by the province. Funding, by the way, that was taken away by the previous Conservative government. We need to one of the things we need to always remember when we look at what the Liberals are doing and what they've done over the last 15 years is look at what they got themselves into initially. What boat did they step into when they inherited the reins of government? And I talk about this a lot. A lot of people get mad at me when I bring up invoke the ghost of Mike Harris. But the reality is Mike Harris left so many economic time bombs behind for municipalities, for the province as a whole, for business, and that people just forget about those things. Because when that happens, when it happens 5 years down the road, because that's when it was mandated to happen, well, then the new government has to own that, right? It's like the regulations for Kinder Morgan that were the reason Kinder Morgan isn't going through isn't because of the Trudeau government. The reason Kinder Morgan isn't going through is because Kinder Morgan was told that their original assessment was crap. They didn't consult with First Nations. They decided they didn't want to consult with First Nations, and lo and behold, here we are. Okay, if you want to blame the government for that, that's up to you. But the reality is, the industry itself, and this is the same thing we're seeing here in Ontario with the Ring of Fire. We could have had Ring of Fire developed in this province 5-10 years ago, but we haven't because the province said to the industry, okay, well, we don't care if you've already been permitted. You need to get the approval of First Nations before we allow you to proceed with your permit or allow you to proceed to the next stage. And the industry said, screw that. We don't have to. We've already been approved by you guys. Why should we have to talk to the natives? Well, you're on their land. Well, you guys said we could do that, though. Well, we're saying, no, you can't. Now we're saying you got to consult with the natives. The natives are saying, we'd like to be consulted. They're saying, well, we don't have to consult with you. We're not going to consult with you. We should be able to just proceed with our permits. Much like what Kinder Morgan has just said, right? But the reality is the Supreme Court of Canada has stated quite unequivocally, based on our charter and the treaty rights that were granted to Indigenous peoples in this country, that they get a say in what happens on their land. Like it or not, that's just a friggin' reality. And it's the same thing here in Ontario.
Yeah, absolutely. What I read for most of the analysis, for Ontario, I do tend to read Marika Walsh a lot in iPolitics. And the way she described it is the Liberals and the PCs are staring at the same issue from opposite ends of the field. And right. I think that's true. And then on top of that, you find Andrea Horwath about the budget. She said it was meager. And she said, I do not agree with any of these programs. They are leaving people out on every measure. So
they are.
So
she's right. But there are going to be people left behind. But here's the thing, Glenn. If we want everyone to be included and nobody left behind, well, then we're going to need to raise taxes. One of the things this budget doesn't do is raise taxes. All right. Now we're going to have a deficit of $6.75 billion over the next 5 years. We could have no deficit at all. Ontario could raise the PST by 1 point. 1 cent. Okay? We could do that. But there'd be a huge hue and cry, oh, you're taxing us. We're just tax and spend liberals, tax and spend liberals. They've managed to pull this budget and create a program, and create a number of programs, rather, that benefit the most people ever in the history of this province. The NDP said it doesn't go far enough. Well, how big is the deficit the NDP is proposing then? Because clearly whoever gets into government is going to be in deficit if they're going to proceed with any of these plans. Now, Doug Ford doesn't anticipate having any kind of a deficit because Mr. Ford doesn't plan on following through on the bulk of these issues. All right? So, I mean, you're right. Yeah. They're staring at the same issue from two different spectrums. Now, there's a really interesting piece by Paul Booth in the Maclean's magazine from June of 2017. And he talks about the fact that, how did Ontario get back to balance? How did we do it? How did we manage to pull that off? And they did so by cutting everything as possible that they could. I mean, we have a hospital in our riding that has been operating on a shoestring budget since the darn thing was built. We have only just since the last provincial budget, not the latest, but the last one, finally gotten to the point where it's getting sustainable funding. They just increased their permanent funding prior to the budget coming down, so it's not a budget-related issue, in just before Christmas of last year, where they committed to another $1 million a year. Because the bottom line is, our hospital has been audited, and it's probably the most audited, if not one of the most audited hospitals in the province. It is the most financially, fiscally managed hospital in the province of Ontario, and it's a small rural hospital. So, I mean, they have been watching the beans so tightly. I don't know what the Conservatives are talking about with this idea of finding $8 billion rather, in finding efficiencies. This government has been finding efficiencies for the last 4 years without raising taxes. And contrary to what you may be hearing from both the NDP, who want to raise taxes, and the Conservatives who want to cut taxes, this government has managed to do everything it has planned to do without raising taxes. And I think personally that is something that should be lauded. Instead, what do we hear? We hear corruption. We hear scandal this, scandal that. You can't trust the Wynne government. Well, I don't know what you can't trust them with. I honestly don't get it. People have always said to me, you sound like a liberal shill. I'm a nonpartisan, Glenn. You know that. I vote for the party and the people that are going to best represent the people of this province. If the Conservatives were offering the same thing, if we had the Bill Davis Conservatives that I grew up in Ontario under, those progressive Conservatives, because I'm looking at Kathleen Wynne's budget and I'm thinking it's a progressive Conservative budget from the 1970s.
Well, the first public measurements after this budget came out seemed to indicate that it was popular with the Ontario public, despite what the corporate media was saying, despite what the other two parties were saying. It seemed to hit a pretty good spot, because within 2 days, the PCs dropped 6 points, and the New Democrats dropped 2 points, and the Liberals went up. So is there any momentum that they can seize from this?
Well, again, they really have to get out from they really got to get out from under this notion that's being created by the opposition narrative that you can't trust Kathleen Wynne, that this is a scandal-plagued government. I mean, I have looked back over the last decade to find out where these so-called scandals are that they talk about. They talk about the gas plants. Well, there was a guy today who just got sentenced to, I think, 4 months in jail for unlawful access to a government computer and conspiracy to, I can't remember exactly, but none of the conviction says anything about the gas plant. It doesn't talk about the so-called corruption or the so-called scandal. They refer to a guy who had unauthorized access to a government computer, which is their assertion, and that he was attempting to commit mischief. That's what he was convicted of. Was he convicted of trying to overthrow, undermine democracy? No, he wasn't. Then you had the issue with the campaign for a candidate in Sudbury that was considered a scandal, which Patrick Brown was being sued by the Premier for libel because he said the Premier was on trial, which she wasn't. I mean, we've seen a lot of manufactured crises from the opposition, but we haven't actually seen anything. The problem is that's what sticks to Kathleen Wynne. This is what people are, you're scandalous, you're corrupt. Then they talk about hydro. We talked about this on your program the last time I was on your show. Look, the reality is they've spent $90 billion, billion with a B, listeners, on hydro infrastructure. That was hydro infrastructure that, in some cases, had no money spent on it since the late 70s and early 80s. Okay, here we are in this started in 2014. So between 2014 and now, over the last 4 years, they have spent huge amounts of money on not just transmission, rebuilding towers, rebuilding hydro infrastructure, removing some hydro facilities and having to redo those. I mean, billions of dollars spent to upgrade it so that when you go to your cottage in the middle of the summer and flip the switch, you'll have power. And yet people still say, well, you know what? I got a hydro bill last month for $119 and it's all service. It's all delivery charges. I mean, I haven't been in my cottage for the whole season, and yet they're charging me $119. You live in the middle. Your cottage is in the middle of nowhere. You're connected to the grid, and you're complaining because you actually have access to hydro. You don't have to have a gas-powered generator at your cottage in the middle of the woods in Ontario. You can be on the grid. But guess what? Being on the grid, it doesn't come free. People don't care about that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Why should I have to pay that? I'm not there. Well, so what? When you close your cottage, do you disconnect from the grid? I mean, and people want it's not just their cake and eat it too. They want their cake and a nice warm double and eat it too, without having to pay for it. I mean, who's paying for these infrastructure upgrades if not taxpayers? And again, as I point out, this was all done without raising taxes. I mean, I don't care where you live. That's good governance. Have there been some mistakes? Absolutely, there have been some mistakes. The orange helicopter issue back, more than a decade ago, yeah, that was a big problem a decade ago. The e-health problems people have with e-health, personally, e-health has helped me tremendously as a person who suffers from a chronic genetic lung disorder, a guy who's hoping to get himself on the double lung transplant list eventually. The fact that I can go into my general practitioner in Coburg and my specialist in Toronto at the Toronto Western Hospital, the top lung specialist in the country, I might add, can find out what's been going on with my health because of tapping a few keys. They don't have to wait for the fax machine to be fired up. They don't have to wait for this authorization form to be signed or that authorization form. That's all available electronically. That's what e-health was all about. Has it been difficult and expensive? Absolutely. You're talking about building a system from the ground up that has to be completely secure. We're talking about your very personal and private health information, totally confidential, and yet they've managed to pull it off. My God, what a scandal. What a scandal.
Well, I find it...
I mean, again, all I'm saying is I pay attention. I've been watching what the Liberal government's been doing for the last 15 years. I remember what Mike Harris did. I remember what David Peterson did before him, and the NDP before him, and David Peterson before that. I mean, I know what a scandal looks like. This government hasn't been scandal plagued, okay? I mean, look at the history. Be the elephant in the room, listeners. That's what I tell you. Have a long memory. Don't forget. The media, the opposition, they'll try and create a narrative, but if you can poke holes in that narrative, then that means they're lying to you.
Well, I find it interesting that the prototypical person you described with wanting cake and eating it and not even wanting to pay, I think that's a real big part of how Doug Ford's methods resonate so strongly, because he says the same things. Oh, yeah, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut that, we're going to cut that, and we're going to cut taxes, and nobody's going to lose their job.
Yeah.
Cool story,
Mike
bro. Cool story.
Yeah. Well, remember, Mike Harris did the same thing with his common sense revolution. And look how many people lost. I mean, Mike Harris went to war with every teacher in this province. Separate school, Catholic board, high school, junior school. He went to war with the doctors. He closed more hospitals than any other premier in the history of this province. Closed more schools than any other history. He forced communities to amalgamate. I have a community down the road from me, Port Hope, which used to be Port Hope and Hope Township. They were forced, basically at gunpoint by the premier, to amalgamate. They had no choice. There was no room for discussion. Have we seen one forced amalgamation under this current government? No, not one. Not one. what we've seen is a government that has taken back some of those things that were downloaded to municipalities because they know municipalities can't afford to pay for them. A whole bunch of services that were downloaded, again, just so that the province could say they balanced their budget, right? Well, we balanced our budget. Now you got municipalities that are scrambling to try and come up with ways to balance their budget because it's, provinces or municipalities can't legally have a deficit, right? So now you got people cutting services. Also, the provinces say they balance the budget.
Now we should move on to the leaders themselves and the campaigns around them to this point, even though the writ hasn't been dropped. But I mean, come on, let's get serious. I mentioned Jamie Watt from Toronto Star. The column he wrote as far as Kathleen Wynne's chances, the way he sees them, is called "Veering Left is Right for Kathleen Wynne." And Doug Ford said that this was a spending spree funded by taking money out of the pockets of taxpayers. Meanwhile, Andrea Horwath, who has championed many of the ideas in this budget, dismissed it as a last-minute, last-ditch attempt at re-election. But Mr. Watt calls this a very clever document and said Wynne's Liberals had little strategic choice but to veer sharply left. They are a government that has run out of room on the right side, while in Ontario, Liberals are often elected with support from moderately conservative voters. In the Premier's case, that ship has sailed. Now, he says the Liberals have a steady leftward march of the last 15 years. Commitments to green energy projects, raising the minimum wage, significant overall general spending increases, and they also have the baggage of being a long-term party in power. Somehow, he's saying there is a portion of the Ontario electorate that those factors right there are enough to turn them off, no matter what the Liberals say. So I'm just curious, what camp would be against those things? And yet, as you've already said and we've gone over, the Ontario Liberals managed to do it and recover to a balanced budget. So where exactly is the misinformation in this process? Because when you look at the facts, like I said, if you're an outsider and you heard that budget and the facts in there are true, those are results of what has been done, and this is how we're going to carry it on. It's not like a Doug Ford speech. It actually has all the evidence in it you need, with where to find more if you're so inclined. But yet it's painted as a desperate measure or a foolish spending of money. But yet, as you said, the all-party committee went all over the province, and people said, yeah, we understand. This is a deficit situation, but we want this stuff. So why is there such a disconnect between punditry and corporate media compared to what members of the provincial parliament find going around the province?
I think a lot of it has to do with people and their lifestyles. People are very busy right now. They don't have the time to sit down and watch, a good interview on CPAC, for instance, or listen to. All they're hearing is the sound bites. They're hearing News Talk 10 in Toronto or AM 640, whatever the talk stations are, slamming the Premier every day. Oh, the Premier, I can't believe the Premier stupidly did this or stupidly. I mean, it's all about spin, right, for the most part. If they actually talked about what the government has been doing, which they don't. Okay, the best way I can describe this, Glenn, is it comes down to feelings versus facts. If you feel like you're desperate, if you feel like it's worse now than it was 15 years ago, well, then you're going to look for somebody to blame those feelings on, okay? Are things better than they were 15 years ago? Sure, for the most part, but there are still people who feel as though, that they have been unduly put upon by the powers that be. And if the powers that be happen to be liberal right now, well, then so be it. I think a lot of the narrative, though, has been really crafted around this idea of how people feel. They don't feel like they're better off. They may be better off, but they don't feel like they are. And I think part of the problem that the Premier is going to have in Ontario right now, and I think the same is true probably in Alberta with Rachel Notley, even though I think she's doing a fabulous job as well, to be honest with you, okay? You may disagree. But here's the thing. If you look at the facts and you look at the hard numbers and you look at the reality of the situation, then you may say, because I've spoken to Liberals in the riding that said to me before Doug Ford became the leader anyway of the PCs, that they were going to vote Conservative this time around. You know, there's just too much baggage with the Liberals. And then Doug Ford gets elected, and these very same Liberals who said to me they were thinking about switching their vote actually did some research. And once they did the research, they realized, wow, okay, I don't know how they came up with this narrative, but the reality is we are way better off than we were before under the previous regime. Yeah, it's been 15 years, but it's been 15 pretty damn good years. I mean, even during the economic downturn that we had, the Great Depression, as it were, of the 21st century, we were still better off than we were with, you know, the province no longer at war with the public schools, no longer at war with healthcare, no longer at war with the public sector. And because of that, it was easier for us to get the growth that we needed. Has the government been perfect? No government is perfect. But what I've seen with this government, as opposed to the previous government, which pandered to its base, let's face it, a lot of governments will pander to their base. This government has spent the last 15 years trying to pander to the broadest base possible. And that broadest base possible, of course, is all of the voters of Ontario. As Andrea Horwath said, she has missed the mark for some people. Yes, she absolutely has. But, you know, you don't base a government on one or two miscues, okay? You don't base a change. I mean, this is people talking about change for change's sake, okay? Yes. Oh, well, the Liberals have been in power. It's too long. You know, both Alberta and Ontario have seen times where the Conservatives were in power for 40-plus years. And look at British Columbia, for crying out loud. I mean, they had the BC Liberals, which were basically a rebirth of another coalition government, and they basically had the same government in power for 40 years as well. Canadians, if they think if they think the government's doing a decent job, they generally, even though they might not be 100% happy, they generally don't throw them out in place of the unknown. All right, we tend to vote for the devil, you know. Unless the devil you know is just a complete basket case.
Well, after this budget came out, Premier Wynne made the rounds, went to, you know, on TV and stuff. She was asked if she thought it would be enough to bring voters on side. And her answer was, I don't know whether it is, but it is a response to what people have said they need. Now, as we've covered, that makes sense. That's the truth. But yet media just lets it drop because they don't want to look into it. But Greg McEachern, who is a strategist with Proof Strategies, said that this is smart, perhaps cynical politics. It is their best path to return to government. The million-dollar question is whether voters vote on issues or whether voters vote on change above all else. Now, the gamble that Wynne is making is that people who really care about deficit spending weren't going to vote for the Liberals anyway. So they're squeezing votes from the left and the very, very red PCs. That's pretty much all they can do, really, isn't it?
Well, they can continue to do what they're hoping to do is hold on to the people that voted for them last time. That's the best option they have, to hold on to the people who voted for them last time. A lot of the people that voted for them last time were, for instance, new voters, okay, people who'd never voted before, whether they were just turning 18 that election or not, but they never voted before, a lot of them. A lot of them were people who were in their middle age who never voted. I know lots of people my age that have never voted in their life, Glenn. Never felt the need to. Don't really care. Doesn't affect them. This time around, our last election, they felt as though it affected them for some reason. I don't know. I hope those people turn up at the polls again this time around. We're talking about people, as you say, NDP can't, in certain ridings, voting NDP is literally a waste of time. And I hate to say that because it sounds undemocratic, but the problem for the NDP, from my position, and I'm going to shift to the NDP quickly here, is the NDP tend to choose candidates who, well, in a lot of ridings, the only candidate they choose is the only person who's put their hand up to run, first and foremost. Okay, so you tend to get people who are ill prepared for the chance that what if they win, right? I mean, a lot of these people are intentional also rants, just so the NDP can have someone running that riding. And I get that, and that's cool, that's democracy. But I don't think you should put any candidate, I don't care if it's an also ran or not, every candidate who puts their name on the ballot is a potential winner, every candidate. I don't care if you're the Libertarian candidate, you're the Communist Party candidate, whatever. If you put your name on the ballot and you run a solid campaign and you get out and knock on the doors and you meet the constituents and the constituents like you, they will vote for you. So anybody can be the MPP, literally. So when you start running candidates that, frankly, if they got the job tomorrow would be screwed, then you know, you're not seriously running to be the Premier of the province of Ontario. I've looked at what Andrea Horwath says. Andrea Horwath says, you know, Ontarians be prepared because this time she's running she's in it to win it, she says. Well, that's a wonderful sentiment, Andrea, but the bottom line is you're running candidates in ridings where, you know, they're not good candidates. It's that simple. So you can't say you're in it to win it when you're actively picking also ran candidates. Now, the same is true of the Liberals or the Conservatives. I mean, they know certain ridings are never going to go their way one way or the other. But, as I say, in an election like this one, I mean, this is an important election because a lot of people are thinking, well, you know, the Liberals have been in a long time. I don't like Wynne for whatever reason. I don't like Kathleen Wynne. I'm not going to vote for her again. I don't like the Liberals, what they've done here, or here. So, I mean, this is one of those elections where anybody could be the winner. And I think it was incumbent upon every party to choose candidates that they think could do a damn good job in the provincial legislature. Has the NDP done that? No. Has the Liberals done that in 100% of the ridings? No. Neither have the Conservatives. But you know what? They're not going to win those ridings either. And that is where it comes down to it, right? Plus, if you run candidates that you don't think are going to win, but you're still running them anyway, what does that tell the voters in your riding? It tells them that you really don't give a damn about them.
Well, what it tells me is that the provincial party is fielding a candidate so they can put in a claim to get costs back for that campaign in that riding. That's what that tells me.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There you go.
That is the bottom line. I mean, what Kathleen Wynne has said.
And Andrea Horwath said, look, in this campaign.
Go ahead, finish.
Andrea says, look, in this campaign, I'm going to work to replace the cynicism people are feeling today with hope. She says they're in it to win it. Well, again, prove it by choosing candidates that you think can do the job.
Well, what some are saying, what Kathleen Wynne is doing, I mean, this is a quote from her. From my perspective, it didn't matter who the leader of the Conservatives was going to be. Our policies are about investing in people, investing in the care of people in this province, and allowing people to be able to care for one another. What we are putting forward as a platform is very, very different than what any of the Conservatives were putting forward, which is cutting and removing supports from people. So what they're saying is, if you vote us out now, we'll lose the progress we've made, and this is about cuts or care. That's what they want to bring it down to. Is that? Do you think that that's intelligent to bring it down to that?
Well, I think it's somewhat disingenuous because what that does is it completely negates what the NDP are talking about. Is that a Kathleen Wynne quote? If that's a Kathleen Wynne quote, that's her talking about the decision between the Liberals and the Conservatives. So she is completely not talking about. She's not talking about the other parties, which is somewhat disingenuous. Okay, it really is. Is it realistic in a lot of ridings? Absolutely. In a lot of ridings, like mine, for instance, it really is going to come down to a Liberal or Conservative. I hate to say it. I know it sounds bad. The NDP in my riding are probably gnashing their teeth at me for saying it, but it's true. Okay, they're not running a candidate who I think could be the minister of any department or even do a decent job as a member of provincial parliament. Is the candidate they're running a decent person? Absolutely. But she's not a candidate I think can do the job. She's not up to the task. And so when it comes down to what this election is about in Ontario, this is why they put the budget out that they did put out, Glenn. What it is it's about whether your government cares about you or whether your government cares more about balancing the budget and giving a sweet deal to the corporations. Conservatives have no problem subsidizing industry, all right? They have no problem providing corporate welfare. But when it comes to taking care of voters, because corporations can't vote, right? When it comes to taking care of voters, they would rather take care of their employer than take care of the worker. But it's the workers who vote, okay? McDonald's doesn't vote. I don't know. General Motors doesn't vote. The workers do, okay? The guy working at the local mom and pop restaurant, he's a voter. If he's working for a corporation, that corporation doesn't get a vote. And yet when it comes, I mean, look, again, I'm going to use the Kinder Morgan example because it's in the news today every day. You know, the Conservatives always talked about how they hated the National Energy Program, right? It's the worst thing. The Eastern Canada was trying to take Alberta's oil. Well, both Rachel Notley and the Prime Minister of Canada have essentially proposed the nationalization of Kinder Morgan's pipelines. They've proposed to basically build those pipelines with taxpayer dollars. Great. So billions of dollars go to subsidize an industry that's already being subsidized. When in the reality, I mean, look, the reason Kinder Morgan's not building that pipeline, Glenn, isn't because of the government of Canada or the government of British Columbia. The reason they're not building that pipeline is because it costs $10 more to produce a barrel of oil than they're going to get at the market rate right now. That's why they're not building that friggin' pipeline. That's why they didn't build Energy East. That's why they haven't built the Trans Mountain the other pipeline to the United States. Because bitumen right now is trading at $10 a barrel less than the cost to pull it out of the friggin' ground. It's the same thing with government subsidies. Do we subsidize industry or do we take care of the people? It's the government's responsibility to take care of the people, and we're a free market economy. We're supposed to be capitalists, which means the businesses are supposed to take care of themselves. They always tell you government has to get out of the way of business so business can do their job. But business has always got their friggin' hand out looking for taxpayer dollars, even though they're getting tax cuts.
Wow, that's a thing nobody seems to want to talk about. But I'm going to segue from Kathleen Wynne into Doug Ford. And some of the media out there, it has to be classified as opinion. There's no other word for it. Tim Powers, who's regular on Power and Politics, regular in a few places. This was in the Hill Times, of all places. Yes, a definite conservative. And this kind of sums up to me that this is something that I think nobody who's objective can deny that Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals are up against. This was Tim Powers' comment on the pre-election budget. He says, living in Ontario these days, it's hard not to feel the desperation of the governing provincial Liberals. Having been around politics for a long time, I've seen some pretty shameless pandering done in the interest of getting re-elected by all political parties, but the Ontario Liberals might be taking it to new levels. Premier Kathleen Wynne's re-election slogan ought to be, "It is free, so vote for me." Except it never really is free, but why get distracted by reality? Now, again, that is just a straight promotion of the cuts agenda, but it doesn't get presented that way. But that's what it is. And then that just brings us to the different picture so far that Doug Ford's been subjected to. Just imagine if Kathleen Wynne had said, no media bus, no platform. We're going to talk about fields and 5 things that we pick out of a hat. Imagine the reaction if the Liberals had done this. But this is what Ford and the Progressive Conservatives have chosen to do. Would you say they've had a pretty easy ride of it so far?
I think they have. I think the Conservatives have been giving a complete free ride. They have not put out any platform. They're not willing to discuss a platform. Doug says he's going to roll it out piecemeal. They don't want to talk about anything that Doug Ford has said in the past. It's as though Doug Ford didn't exist prior to him becoming the leader of the Conservative Party of Ontario. This is a guy with baggage, even at the municipal level, baggage. I'm not talking about going back to when he was a high school drug dealer. I'm talking about, a few years ago when he was trying to hide the fact that his brother had a crack problem. He's a guy who is never willing to be honest. If you look at his political record, he's never voted for increases in funding for the poor. He's never voted to support poor and impoverished people in the province of Ontario. He's all about the corporation. So again, if you want another corporatocrat, if you will, as I like to refer to him, then vote for Doug Ford. If you don't, if you want someone who actually gives a damn about the people who, by the way, vote, then choose somebody like Kathleen Wynne or an Andrea Horwath. The fact of the matter is, Doug Ford opposed the $15 minimum wage. He opposed a $200 tax increase on those making $130,000 a year or more. He's a multimillionaire. He owns a home in Florida. Who cares about where he owns a home? He wants to cut corporate taxes, which are already at a record low. Okay, he doesn't care about the tax. And don't forget, for every percentage of taxes that are cut, that means that's less money in the public coffers. Okay. You want to know why we have debt and massive debts? Well, then, look at how much money's been dumped out of provincial and federal coffers. Who has to make up that shortfall? We do. We're the voters. We have to come up with the money for that. Again, it's not the corporations. It's never the corporations. It's always the individual. And yet it's the individuals who vote.
Again, Jamie Watt did a piece in the Toronto Star about the way he saw the Progressive Conservative and Doug Ford chances. And I'll just look at basically what the end of it is. He says that Doug Ford will keep telling his truths to the people who want to believe them to be truths. And he will just go off discontent. And he says this is the Conservative, the PCPO, this is their best chance to win government in a generation. Right now, currently the way things are, Doug Ford, the guy who can do it? Or did they make a mistake selecting him as the leader? I know that's a pretty wide question, but it's one that deserves to be heard, because if Christine Elliott was the leader today, this would be a completely different election. Would it not?
Oh, absolutely. Well, for two reasons, though. Because Christine Elliott, first of all, has the experience of being in provincial government. She did have a seat before she resigned to be the provincial health ombudsperson, first of all. Secondly, she already committed to the Patrick Brown platform. And let's face it, if you put Patrick Brown's People's Guarantee up with Kathleen Wynne's proposal, very similar. Okay? It's not apples and oranges, but they're very similar. So it would have been more difficult for people to say, well, Kathleen Wynne's so different. She's been in here forever. Let's go with this plan from Patrick Brown, or in the case of the other, Christine Elliott. Doug Ford has decided to throw out that plan. Doug Ford has decided to just take that People's Guarantee and throw it out. So again, no guarantee from Doug Ford. No surprise from this follower. Okay. What we're seeing is a guy who is not offering anything other than hyperbole. Let me give you an example of some of the things Doug Ford has said. Okay, these are quotes from Doug Ford. Doug Ford says that Kathleen Wynne said they were going to balance the budget. She never balanced. She never balanced the budget, he said. Now, this was him talking to radio pundits up at Country 105 in Thunder Bay, okay? First of all, he refused to talk about conservative cuts, which are forecasted to be $10 billion under his watch. Where's that $10 billion coming from, Doug? He doesn't want to talk about it. He refused to talk about the independent economist Jim Stanford's report that it's going to cost 75,000 jobs under Doug Ford. Doesn't want to talk about that. He says that she never balanced the budget. She balanced the budget in 2016-17. She brought in a surplus budget at the end of 2017-18. Okay, those are just facts. And again, but don't let facts get in the way of feelings, right, Doug Ford? Because that's how he likes to operate. Doug Ford said, we will make sure we drive efficiency through proper procurement purchasing so that we have a ministry, and we have a dozen ministries and agencies taking out our ears, and everyone does their own purchasing. They buy their own cars. He's saying that there's no such thing as competitive procurement from the government. which is a pile of crap, okay? And I know people who work for the provincial government that will tell you that that is a flat-out lie. The fact is the government already does joint competitive procurements across every ministry through the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. There's actually a ministry within the government of Ontario that ensures that procurement is done on a streamlined basis so that you don't have different ministries purchasing from different people and buying their cars at more expensive rates because they're not getting a bulk purchase. You know, the province spends $80 million a year for mobile devices and services through one source, okay, the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. $14 million a year on printing services, $4 million a year on IT, $3 million a year on laboratory supplies. Okay, so Doug Ford, again, talking out of his ass when he says that the government doesn't do this, and he's going to do that to find efficiencies. He also says we lost 300 jobs since the Liberals came to power, and that's true. Initially, there were 300,000 jobs lost during the financial meltdown. But the fact is that 820,000 net new jobs have been created in Ontario just since the recession alone, and 400,000 of those have happened under Kathleen Wynne's watch. Okay, so that's already $100,000 more, 100,000 people more full-time employed under this premier than were when he talked about it. Okay, he also says the province, we're the greatest province in the country, where the engine of this province is now a have-not province. Well, that's a pile of garbage. All right, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Okay, the independent parliamentary budget officer, Ontario is not a have-not province. In fact, Ontario continues to be a net contributor towards equalization. All right. He also says that, you know, that everyone is uniting together. They're turning this province around, making sure that we get back on track. And again, that presumes that we're not on track. Ontario's led the G7 in economic growth for the past 3 years. Our unemployment rate's the lowest it's been since they started calculating unemployment rates. That's just a fact. He says the education system is broken, and yet where we graduate more high school graduates in this province, 18% more than when we took office, which is the highest ever in the province's history. All right. I mean, again, you know, let's not let facts get in the way of emotions, right? He says he wants to reallocate money to the front lines. Before the Liberals got into power, he says there were 5 ministries. Now there's 24 or 26 deputy ministers. So all the commanders are taking more money, he says. But in the past 13 years, the Ministry of Health budget has doubled. That's doubled, increased from $30 billion a year to $54 billion a year. Okay, that's not cutting back. He says that, you know, the number of family physicians in this province has gone up by 2,800 positions. Okay, that's a 33% increase in specialists alone. And the number of nurses has increased by 30,000, with just 1,200 more this year alone. So again, a lot of talk, a lot of feelings, very few facts. Very, very few facts. He says, you look at the energy costs, they're through the roof, absolutely through the roof. His aren't, by the way. He lives in Etobicoke, where Toronto Hydro provides him his power. As you can see, folks, the reality is Ontario is about the middle of the pack when it comes to energy costs in North America, a middle of the pack, okay? He says we're going to put more money in people's pockets. Well, this is what the progressive conservatives in Ottawa said, too. They're going to put more money in people's pockets. Well, what does that mean, Glenn? You and I know that means fewer services. You and I know that it's going to cost more to get those services. The Independent Centre for Canadian Policy Alternatives says that a $15 minimum wage would put an extra $1,500 in people's pockets. That's after tax dollars, $1,500 more a year in people's pockets. That's more than $100 a month extra that people didn't have before. But Doug Ford doesn't support a $15 minimum wage. Again, facts, not feelings.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, too. I mean, there's nobody that can dispute with a straight face the fact that it's the lower end of the economic scale that spends as much money as they have because they have to survive. Yep. So you want to talk about economic stimulus, there's no better way to do it than to increase the wage of the people at the bottom end of the scale. Now, I do have that fact right here. In 2016 in Ontario, the high school graduation rate was 86.5%. That is the highest in the province history. And when the Ontario Liberals came in 2004, it was 68%.
That's right. Literally, the numbers have literally been reversed.
Yeah, that is impressive. But here's one that demonstrates exactly the way Ford is campaigning. He was on CTV's Your Morning, in March, and Doug Ford said, folks, you see what's happening south of the border. They have trillions of dollars coming in, the lowest unemployment we've seen in 20 years, and they have manufacturing jobs flowing back into the country. Up in Ontario, you have more red tape, more rules, more regulations, the carbon tax, the highest hydro rates, some of the highest property taxes, and then you're supposed to compete? Well, in that statement, not only did he combine about 5 things that are completely separate, but they're all bullshit. And this is the way this guy's campaigning to become Premier of Ontario?
Well, here's the thing. That's the kind of stuff that resonates with people who only have a few minutes a day to listen to the news, right? This is the thing that resonates with people who don't have the ability to do just a modicum of research. I mean, literally, you could take what he says, punch it into Google or Bing or whatever your search engine is, DuckDuckGo maybe, and you know, it'll come back. You know, I mean, the BS meter on this guy is redlining, for crying out loud. But people, again, it's feelings versus facts, right? I mean, I'm reminded of when the former Senate Majority Speaker Tip O'Neill, not Tip O'Neill, sorry, I can't remember. Oh, crap, what was his name? American guy in the last election talking about Trump. He was talking about crime and murder rates. And the pundit looks at him and says, well, crime rates are the lowest they've been in 40 years. Murder rates are the lowest they've been in 40 years. Yeah, but people don't feel that way, he says. That's not what people are feeling. People are feeling afraid. People are feeling like, you know, they can't go outside. Well, you know, again, I'm sorry if that's how you feel, okay? But, you know, let's not let facts get in the way of a decent narrative, I guess, is what the conservatives tend to see. And as I said before, I said this, and I will back this up. You know, I've spoke to a number of people in this riding who said they were not going to vote for the Liberals. I'm not going to vote for the Liberals. They were hoping Christine Elliott was going to get in. They were going to vote for Christine Elliott. They were going to vote for the People's Guarantee. You know, but once Doug Ford got in, they decided to review the record. Let's look at the last 14 years. Let's actually see what has happened in this province over the last 14 years. And the people that have done that, and it doesn't take long to do it, listeners, it takes 5-10 minutes at the most. You're not going to have to do hours of research, a quick scan. And, I mean, I had one woman who is a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, okay? She would die before she voted Liberal. She's voting Liberal because she's looked at the record. She said, you know, he says all these things, and I think, my God, that can't possibly be true. That cannot be true. So they quickly look at the record, they review what's being said, and they go, yeah, you know what? It's not true. It's actual BS. And so now I got a guy who's running for my vote who's lying 6 ways from Sunday. So, I mean, you know, it just comes down to that. Some people may have to plug their nose to vote Kathleen Wynne. Some people might. See, me, I'm not voting for Kathleen Wynne because I don't live in her riding. I'm voting for my local representative. That's who I'm voting for. Because my local guy bends over backwards, has busted his ass to do the things that needed to be done in this riding so that people weren't left behind. He has busted his ass. So, yeah, I'm voting for him.
I think that's a result, though, of the monetization of corporate media. It's in their favor to make every election about party leaders. That's it. Because that works for them, because then they only have to concentrate on one source, and they're quite happy to do it that way. Now, some of the people that are claiming to have made Doug Ford the leader of the Progressive Conservatives, I think that the one that really drew a flag to me was the Campaign Life Coalition. Took credit for Doug Ford defeating Christine Elliott because they said they helped Tanya Granick-Allen sign up to 9,000 members and told them to make Ford their second choice on the ballot. So is there going to be a time when these people come calling before the election, or is this something, as I will be a little biased, but I call it the way I see it. The Conservatives are, shall we say, well known for keeping people quiet before the vote, but then after the vote, They're very loud. Do you think that Doug Ford, is that the way he plays ball?
Yeah. I'm going to say
Absolutely.
an unreserved yes. I think that's how. I mean, look at how. I mean, come on. All you have to do is look at how his brother got elected mayor of Toronto to realize that, how he got his seat as a councillor. I mean, the guy will say and do anything. If he needs to muzzle someone, to shut somebody down within his organization so he gets further ahead, until he gets further ahead, he's going to do that, absolutely. The good news with the Tanya Granick-Allen thing is she's not even going to be allowed to run as a PC candidate at this point because of some of the crazy stuff she said recently. Right? I mean, she made some comments online about gay marriage, about Muslims, the way they dress, women in burqas dressed like bank robbers or ninjas, she said. I mean, you know, so I don't think she's going to be allowed to run in her riding. And you know, hopefully she doesn't anyway. I mean, the reality is this. A racist is a racist is a racist. You know, just because she's a nice lady doesn't mean she's not a bigot. And the reality is, you know, when it comes to things like abortion, for instance, it's not in Doug Ford's wheelhouse, okay? That's a federal issue. I mean, he talked about closing down the CBC as well. Like, come on, guy, you're running for premier. You know, maybe someone should give you a crash course in what's exactly your responsibility as premier, okay? Deciding how women dress, that's not in your wheelhouse, man. Okay? Banning gay marriage, again, not in your wheelhouse. And look, if you want to be the premier of the province of Ontario, the one thing you're really going to have to learn is the friggin' Constitution.
Well, you know, those are details that aren't going to catch the people that he's speaking to.
Exactly.
You know, now there was.
That's what I thought. That's what I was talking about, though, when I said he has a strong base. I mean, he's got about 29% of support. That's solid support. That's 29% of the people, just like Donald Trump, 29% of the people that would vote for him if he set fire to somebody in the middle of an intersection. Okay, these people would vote for Doug Ford come hell or high water. Who knows why? Maybe he's got something on him. You know, I don't know. But those people are going to vote for him no matter what.
Well, about the strongest thing I've seen in media against Doug Ford with facts is back on March 28th, and it was an editorial from the board of the Toronto Star. And all they did, they didn't call him names, they didn't make fun of him, they just presented facts. And they said, the new Ontario Progressive Conservative leader says if elected premier, he will deliver billions of dollars in tax cuts. He will tackle the province's debt. And he will do all this mostly by weeding out government waste. Ford is promising a free lunch. Yet experience, including Ford's own political past, dictates there is no such thing. There will be costs. And while we cannot be sure of exactly what form they will take, we can be confident the costs will be high and the costs will be cruel. Ford says he would cut at least $10 billion in income and sales taxes, a promise held over from the People's Guarantee to cover the lost revenues. Brown planned to impose a carbon tax, most of which would have been returned to voters. The province's books, according to Brown, would have been balanced by 2020. Ford, too, promises balance. But while Ford likes the tax cuts, he doesn't like the carbon tax or any other tax, leaving a $10 billion hole in his budget. Not to worry, says the self-proclaimed stopper of gravy trains. Ford insists the better part of the shortfall, about $6 billion, could be covered through the elimination of so-called inefficiencies. Unfortunately, those who promise savings through waste elimination rarely say where, specifically, this waste can be found. And Ford is no exception. He wants us to take it on faith. That would be a mistake, as anyone who recalls Ford's tenure at Toronto City Hall can attest. The Fords famously came to power vowing to save the city billions of dollars a year by eliminating waste at City Hall. They hired the consulting firm KPMG to find inefficiencies and recommended areas to cut. KPMG was largely stumped perhaps they suggested the city could afford to close a few libraries. When residents revolted in the face of that threat, the Ford administration backed off and instead demanded each department cut 10% of its budget, 10% across the board without any apparent rhyme or reason, even though the report from KPMG suggested this would in every case cut into core services. There simply isn't enough gravy. There never is. But yet this is what he's talking about doing, and it's being covered on face value. How long can this go on? Or will this continue until June 7th without any serious explanation? Or is that what the TV debates are for?
Well, that's a good question. I think the TV debates are for a lot more than that. I mean, don't forget, it was the TV debates that got John Kennedy elected, right? Nixon was a sweaty mess. They say he won on the radio, but lost on TV. I think the same could be said true of Doug Ford. He talks a good game, but when it comes to actually getting your hands dirty, he's nowhere to be found. And I think that's what the voters of Ontario are going to see here. I honestly believe that. He hasn't got a plan. If he has got a plan, he can't articulate it. He's asking voters to take him on faith. And I mean, let's face it, the guy has no track record to support us taking him on faith. He's offering no real direction for the province other than we need to get the province back on track. As I mentioned earlier, I would argue we've got the strongest growth in the G7. All right? And when I say strongest growth in the G7, I don't mean out of any country in the G7. I mean out of the G7. And so Ontario, all right, put that in perspective. Ontario has the strongest growth in the G7, not Canada, not America or France. Ontario, the province of. Okay? We have the stronger growth than the country has.
Yep. But to continue with the Torstar editorial, Ford won't find $6 billion in waste, just as he and his brother did not find the promised efficiencies at City Hall. Instead, he will have to raise the money the old-fashioned way, taxes, debt, or cuts to services. And giving his outspoken disdain for taxes and debt, it's no great mystery what path he would pursue. The question then is what Ford might choose to cut. Presumably not health care, the costs of which are rising as the population ages, and which he has promised to improve. That takes about half of the province's budget off the table. Will he cut Ontario's already inadequate welfare system? He could completely eliminate it, and it would fill that $6 billion number. He could eliminate the entire justice system. He could eliminate the entire justice system, and that would barely be 2/3 of his promise. So, I mean, Hudak lost the election when he said that his plan of cuts would involve 100,000 public service jobs. Well, Doug Ford apparently is not going to say anything like that, but he's going to promise $6 billion in cuts. So where is it going to come from?
So Doug Ford is essentially promising exactly what Tim Hudak did without actually outlining the promise. I mean, give him his kudos. At least Tim Hudak was honest with the voters, right?
And he's not saying where the replacement in revenues for tax cuts, elimination of cap and trade, elimination of a carbon tax, elimination of everything that he doesn't feel good about. He's not saying where this money is going to come from. Now, the way that his team is painting this method of we've got 5 big topics, that's all that matters. The way they're selling this is by saying, if you have 1,000 priorities, you have none. You have to focus our focus will be on the big picture and how to get the province back on track. We need to return Ontario to its rightful place as an economic leader in this country. Talk about bullshit. We've just gone through the fact that Ontario is the economic leader in the G7. So how can his campaign continue to say things like this and it skates?
Because the media will let him do it. The media, for whatever reason, Glenn, and again, I have no idea why, but they don't like Kathleen Wynne. I have to say it that way because that's what I'm seeing. I hear that on the radio. I'm seeing it in their media, seeing it online. They're not going to highlight the BS of Doug Ford. They're just going to say, well, it could be worse. It could be Kathleen Wynne.
And they'll invest just as much time in facts to back that up as they do in leaving Doug Ford alone.
Exactly.
Okay, well, Nick...
We're going to give Doug Ford all the free advertising like Donald Trump, and we're going to hang Andrea Horwath, or we're going to hang Kathleen Wynne, and ignore Andrea Horwath.
Okay, well, I got a little bit here to go through. Now, Nick Nanos was someone that was consulted about this, about the way Ford wants to run his campaign, and he says, it's hard to mess up a 5-point platform. There is a certain simplistic elegance to it in terms of a level of discipline on the message and a lack of moving parts to criticize. Well, of course that makes sense because there are no moving parts that have been revealed or discussed or anything else, but yet as they continue to trumpet about 5 main points, yet when opportunities come up to talk directly to Ontarians about it, Doug Ford doesn't seem so enthusiastic. Tonight, as we do this show, there is a Black community provincial leaders debate, and Doug Ford said no thanks. So
that's right.
Here's the first provincial debate where everybody else is there, and he's busy.
Yeah.
Is he going to keep doing this except for things that are tuned to his crowd? Are we going to see Harper campaigning from Doug Ford?
Are you asking me if Stephen Harper is going to campaign for Doug Ford? I wouldn't be surprised even in the slightest, frankly.
Well, that is a little bit of a sidestep, but I mean, Harper became famous in the 2015 campaign that he would only go to a debate that was put on by his friends and that he knew what was going to happen.
I think you're absolutely right. It's the same. Doug Ford's already doing this with his media events, okay? You know, he's having a media event in my town next week, for instance. Now, I've already, as I say, reached out to see if I can get him on my show. I'm going to guarantee he won't come on my show. We actually have a conservative who's on our board who I got to tell this story. It's freaking hilarious. So he interviewed Christine Elliott when Christine Elliott was in the running. And while he was interviewing Christine Elliott, he spoke to our local candidate, a gentleman named David Piccini. I mentioned earlier, great guy, super candidate, and very intelligent. And he took it upon himself to apologize to David Piccini for the way I handled the interview I had just done with him. Okay? Because he's a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, and he doesn't like my politics, right? So he took it upon himself to apologize to David Piccini for the way our conversation went, at which point Piccini looked at him and said, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. He said, well, you know, Dave was a little aggressive. He says, no, he wasn't aggressive at all. Actually, the interview went really well. I was very happy with the way the interview. Dave's very professional, all right? Because when I interview people on my show, it's a little different than when I'm doing my show by myself, all right? When I'm interviewing somebody, the guest is the guest. I don't care who you are. You're the guest on my show, and I'm going to be what I like to refer to as disgustingly reasonable, okay? I'm not going to let you lie to my face. I'm not going to let you say things that are patently untrue. I'm going to question you about facts, but I'm going to let you have your say. I'm going to let you say what you need to say, which is exactly what I did. And both he and I had a wonderful, as a matter of fact, I've interviewed him 3 times. Okay, so he clearly has no problem with me. So the mere fact that this conservative who's with my radio station, who will probably get the opportunity to interview Doug Ford instead of me, would feel he needs to apologize on my behalf. Frankly, even the conservative candidate was taken aback by that. All right, but that's what we're going to get from Doug Ford. The only people showing up at his events are people who have been vetted, just like Stephen Harper. It's not going to be like Justin Trudeau's visits where people can yell obscenities at him from the crowd. That's not going to be the way it is with Doug Ford. It's going to be media invites alone. We're only going to be inviting people we trust, we know aren't going to put us in a bad light. We're only going to invite people we know are supporters, and we're going to have, it's going to look like a big crowd, but if there's only 30 people there, we'll try and make it look like 1,000. I mean, it's the Donald Trump school of, Donald Trump, hell, no, it's the Joseph Goebbels school of politics.
Now, when Doug Ford announced that they would not be providing a media bus for the leader's campaign, the immediate replies were, he's hiding, he doesn't want to be asked hard questions, he doesn't want to be held accountable, he doesn't want a large platform to have the opportunity to catch all his slip-ups on the tour. Now, the Toronto Star editorial board, again, came out with one on April 5th, the day he announced such, and he said, the editorial board said, one of the best ways to appraise politicians is to match their words against their deeds. On that scale, Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford is scoring poorly. Ford boasts of having courage. He talks of respecting the intelligence of voters. He speaks of having a plan for Ontario. Yet he will not have a bus for media to follow him on the provincial election campaign to begin in a few weeks. This is more than a mere inconvenience to a few journalists who will need to scramble and might well find it impossible to keep up with Ford's campaign. Political reporters in Ontario don't value a seat on campaign buses for weeks at a time for the quality of those cheese doodles or the privilege of making multiple visits to Tweed or Strathroy. Rather, they cover auditioning leaders during a critical time in the life of the province, leaders aspiring to positions of power over institutions such as schools and hospitals and services that most families hold dear. Journalists monitor these campaigners for consistency, credibility, and capacity under pressure. They do this to provide voters with the best possible information on which to base decisions. Any party leaders with respect for the office they seek and the people they purport to serve, with proper confidence in the thoroughness and sense of their platform, should welcome media coverage, which is why Ford's decision is egregious. So when you have one of the media powerhouses of Ontario saying that this sends the absolute wrong message for what people should be looking at, how long will media say that? How long will media punish him? Will it depend on the access they receive?
It depends on the media. I mean, let's face it. The Conservatives don't give a damn about what Toronto Star has to say. Okay, Toronto Star is a liberal, pinko, communist newspaper. As far as they're concerned, the only people reading it are underemployed losers who don't have any real political acumen. That's the mantra from Conservatives. They only read, the Post or the Globe and Mail. Even the Globe and Mail, that's a bit of a pinko rag too, right? I mean, let's face it. So, I mean, look, the bottom line is Doug Ford is playing to his base, okay? Because he can now tell his voters or his base that, the reason we didn't decide to bring on a media bus is because, we don't want to have to explain to those people who are pandering to the government of the day, how we came up with our plans. We'd rather speak directly to the voters. Stephen Harper did that, right? Stephen Harper said, well, he doesn't give national address, but he used to go to smaller media outlets like community radio and stuff like that and speak until it got too difficult for him. I mean, the reality is if you can't control your narrative, which you can't do if you're running a media bus, then, then shut it down. And that's exactly what we saw with the Conservatives in the past. That's what we're going to see with the Conservatives now. Sadly, I think one of the reasons he decided to do that too was because of what happened to Tim Hudak, right? I mean, Hudak basically blew the election. That was his election to lose, just like this is Doug Ford's election to lose. If they can keep Doug Ford shut up and sequestered and, only having his head pop up, to do kissing babies and selfies, then, they got a pretty good shot. If he talks, if they get him in a recording saying something ridiculous, which, let's face it, it's Doug Ford. He's going to say something stupid. He's going to say something ridiculous. I mean, look what he said about the autism house, the house for the autistic kids that was going to be built in a neighborhood in Etobicoke. Okay? I mean, here's a guy who said that he would, I had no idea those kids were going to be allowed outside, he said. And he then went on to say, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to buy that house myself and tear it down. I'm not going to let that happen and to destroy this neighborhood. Okay, we're talking about a house for people with autism, okay? We're not talking about a halfway house for serial killers. We're talking about people suffering from autism spectrum, all right, Doug Ford? But the reality is Doug Ford doesn't care about those people. He claims, I mean, in one of his recent speeches, he gives a lot of time to talking about mental health issues. Well, my brother Rob suffered from mental health issues. Dude, you suffered from mental health issues, okay? I mean, anyone who can, he basically did, I said I would retweet on it because it just so reminded me of the time that Donald Trump mimicked that guy with Bell's palsy. Remember when Donald Trump did that video of him mimicking the guy with a physical disability? Doug Ford did exactly the same thing, only with regards to people with autism. But are we hearing about that? No, we're not hearing about that. We're hearing about what a bitch Kathleen Wynne is. Okay, that's what we're hearing about. We're hearing about how the Liberals are corrupt and they stole money from us. Again, hyperbole, rhetoric, feelings. Let's not let facts get in the way of our negative narrative. Okay, he says he's going to run a positive campaign. I'm positive he's going to put his foot in his mouth every single day, and that's why he doesn't want the media watching him.
Well, that's exactly the first thing I thought as well. I mean, just like Harper did, and it didn't help in the end. But we'll see what happens, and we'll see how determined the media is to look for that market share that nobody's had the guts to go out there and get yet. Because we know what happens. Once somebody goes a direction and it starts to get traction, they all follow the leader. So it's a dangerous game that Ford is playing, because if his gaffes get to be spectacular, they're going to get run. Somebody's going to run them, and then it'll be viral, and then you can't miss the bus.
Okay, sure, but I mean, I got 3 words for you: grab them by the pussy. 4 words. Sorry. I mean, that should have tanked Donald Trump's campaign, right? Donald Trump should be a freaking footnote in American politics right now, but he isn't, because people didn't like Hillary Clinton. Is Kathleen Wynne going to get Hillary Clinton in Ontario? That's the question I'm asking. Is she going to get Hillary Clinton? Are people not going to vote for her because she's an unattractive lesbian? I mean, that's what I'm hearing from people, right? That's not my opinion, by the way, listeners. Those are not my words, okay? The reality is she's going to get Hillary Clinton. She's going to get blamed for everything that's ever happened in this province. She's going to be blamed for every boondoggle. They're going to say she's a tax and spend liberal, even as I have already pointed out, they haven't raised taxes, okay? I mean, as I say, she could balance the budget tomorrow and bring through all of these programs by a simple increase of the PST by 1%. That could happen tomorrow. Justin Trudeau, okay, could balance the federal budget tomorrow by increasing the GST by 2 points. That's a fact, okay?
Yes.
Is he going to do it? Hell no.
No, it's political suicide. That's right.
Yeah.
Now,
it's good public policy, though.
Yeah. Now, Jamie Watt's 3rd column was on Andrea Horwath. And he says, Andrea Horwath must be the people's champion. Heading into her 3rd election as leader, Andrea Horwath can't seem to catch a break. After winning her party's leadership in 2009, She led the NDP from the doldrums where it had lived since its crushing defeat in 1995. Her steady and reasonable management approach, combined with her charisma and down-to-earth, approachable style, can be credited with much of that. But that hasn't been enough. And now, should she not at least be able to form opposition, this election will likely be her last. Now, politics is rarely fair, and to make matters worse, a series of unfortunate events have befallen the New Democrats. For a while, Horwath looked quite competitive. The Liberals were trailing, and she was one of two fresh faces. But Patrick Brown's downfall has brought up the entire progressive conservative topic, and it's been the NDP who's paid for it.
That's right.
She has little option now but to advance a left-leaning approach to populism. The problem is that Premier Wynne has skillfully been using the power of incumbency to move in on that territory. The Premier's policy announcements have been aimed squarely at winning new voters from the NDP. Now, Horwath can't let herself get squeezed out, but he mentions the traditional coalition that make up the Ontario NDP. Urban intelligentsia, blue-collar sensibility, and rural cooperation. Now, and he's got an example here. That's how the NDP managed to have Parkdale High Park, Hamilton Centre, and Essex all at the same time. So, I mean, when you look at it that way, that is an accomplishment. But in 2014, she made gains in southwestern Ontario, but one seat each in Toronto and Ottawa. And that's going to be the deal this time. She has to protect the rural and blue-collar seats, but yet she has to break in to the two largest urban cores in Ontario. How is she going to do this?
Well, again, this goes to the issue that I was talking about. To be honest with you, I don't know how she's going to do it, okay? Because it goes to the point I was making earlier, which was that, you know, they don't properly vet their candidates, okay? And I said all parties do this, and it's true. In some ridings where you don't think you got a snowball's chance in hell, as long as you got someone to carry your banner, no problem. But, you know, look what happened to Bob Rae when Bob Rae got elected. No one was surprised more, I think, than Bob Rae's candidates that they won. All right? This was a cadre of people that were also Rands. They knew they were also Rands. And the next thing you know, like Peter Cormos, they were in cabinet. Holy crap. So, I don't know. I don't think Andrea Horwath can cast herself as the anti-Wynne because, you know, again, a lot of the policies the Liberals are bringing in are, in fact, left-leaning, if you will, NDP programs, right? I mean, let's face it, the universal health care, socialized pharmacare, dental care, allowing people to be stay-at-home caregivers. That's something else that's in this budget we haven't talked about. We'll talk about it in a quick moment. I think the problem for Andrea Horwath is that she has not properly presented herself as a viable option. She herself is a good candidate, okay? She's a great lady. She does some good work. She's a solid member of parliament. She's a solid leader of her party. But the fact remains she's the leader of a party that, for the most part, is unelectable. And I say that with all honesty, okay? I mean, you look at some of the candidates they're running. I've seen the candidates they've run, okay? And I hate to say it, I was a card-carrying New Democrat for decades, okay? I abandoned the NDP when I felt the NDP abandoned me. And I don't think the NDP has ever gotten back from where they once were, which was a party that wasn't just running around trying to say, oh, I mean, the same thing that happened in Ontario to the NDP has happened in Ottawa to the NDP. Tom Mulcair took the NDP to the center. All right, Andrea Horwath had for a decade has tried to play the NDP in the center. All of a sudden, she got outflanked by the Liberals who've gone to the left. Okay, because she figured that, you know, in Ontario, people want to have a balanced budget. They want to have services, but they don't want to have too high taxes. Again, you know what? Stick with what you know. Stay with basic principles. If you are a left-leaning party that believes in social justice, then for God's sake, stay a left-leaning party that believes in social justice. Don't go swinging towards the center or the right because you think that's what people want to hear. If people watch you do that, they're going to know that you're not genuine. They're going to know that you're going to do whatever it takes to get elected, and people will see through that, I hope. So for Andrea Horwath, unfortunately, I hope she gets her seat. I hope she wins her seat. There's some doubt that Kathleen Wynne could win her seat, to be honest with you. There's a real concern there in Toronto. But I think for Andrea Horwath, unfortunately, she didn't play the long game. She should have stuck to the long game. Unfortunately, she got bogged down and dragged into the nuances of the short game. And they don't have a short game. The NDP has no short game. All right? They are a strong collective, if you will. I don't want to say communist because they're not communist. But they definitely are social democrats. Unfortunately, so are the liberals.
Josh DeHaas from CTV interviewed a couple people about what does Andrea Horwath have to do. U of T political scientist Chris Cochran, Carleton University professor Paul Thomas say that Horwath's biggest asset is a voter's strong desire for change combined with her lack of baggage. Poll after poll has found Ontarians want a change in government, but a whopping 81% of those polled by Dart Research for Newstalk 1010 agreed with the statement, "It is time for another provincial party to take over." 81%. That is just amazing to me. It tells me that people are just not spending enough time understanding what the hell is going on. Either that or they only care about a very sliver of the pie of what's involved in government. Now, do you think that voting demographics are getting that fractured, that it's coming down to 30 seconds a day is adequate input to basically change a government in a province with what, 8.5 million people?
Well, as I say, this is the problem with feelings versus facts. If you only have a short amount of time to devote to it, you're going to be focused on feelings. You're not going to have enough time to dig into the facts. I mean, I had a caller say to me last week, they said, you know what, you say this all the time, Dave. You say, do your research, check your facts. He says, but, you're a political wonk. You're a guy who does this because this is what you enjoy. Most people, he said to me, my caller, don't enjoy politics as much as you do. Okay? For them, it's something that they have to pay attention to because they don't want to continue to get hosed by their government. But they would much rather watch the hockey game. All right? And it's true. That's a fact. For me, this is, your listeners are probably saying, who is this freaking guy? I mean, he knows way too much. Why does he know so much? Because I don't follow the Toronto Maple Leafs, okay? I don't pay attention to football or hockey or basketball. I'm that rare Canadian commodity that doesn't watch hockey, okay? I watch CPAC. I follow what's happening politically. Why? Because I know it affects my every single day. It affects how I'm getting my health care treatment. It affects how much money my municipality gets from the federal and provincial governments. It affects whether or not my town has, a community center versus, a paved pad where you can play ball hockey. I mean, the reality is politics affects our lives in so many ways that it's so important to pay attention, we're about to have an election right now in Ontario where people want to throw the bums out simply because they're doing too good of a friggin' job.
Well, this is something that, 81%. It doesn't matter how badly you want to skew a poll, but it's for a radio station, so it's going to be pretty informal. It's going to be pretty random compared to some of them. And for 81% that want change, let me change that. 81% that feel the need for change.
That's right.
That's more accurate. Oh my God. Well, all three parties should know that it's up for grabs.
It's anybody's game at this point. When Doug Ford became the leader of the Conservative Party of Ontario, it became an open election. Patrick Brown would have beat Kathleen Wynne. Maybe not to the same majority as the current Liberal government, but Patrick Brown would have beat Kathleen Wynne. Christine Elliott would have beat Kathleen Wynne.
Yes, I agree on that. Christine Elliott would have beat Kathleen Wynne. And can you imagine that? 3 female leaders? That
would have been wonderful.
Been something.
Well, it would have been a record in the country. I don't think in the history of this country we would have ever seen a similar situation.
I bet you in the British parliamentary system, it's probably the first time. But we didn't get it, so who cares?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, we can debate it all you want. It's irrelevant.
Now, where are things at this point? Again, Marika Walsh in iPolitics on April 3rd had a little bit of an update on how everybody's doing, for how many people they have nominated, et cetera, et cetera. The PCs are leading. They have more. They had 98 candidates nominated on April 3rd, 80 for the Liberals, 60 for the New Democrats. And there are 124 ridings this election, not 107. So
that's right.
they're all saying, yeah, no problem, it's cool, we're good. But I mean, the NDP have 60, the Greens have 57. So
right.
I think the NDP with their organization should be a little further ahead than that. But again, like you said, it buys into their problems. One thing I did notice, though, is that, well, for people who don't know, Jagmeet Singh was an MPP for Brampton East. And, of course, he is now the federal NDP leader. His brother, Guratan Singh, is seeking the nomination for the NDP. Is that something they can count on there?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, his brother will have no say in it. So it's not like his brother is the leader of the federal NDP can have any say in what happens in the local riding association. But you never know. He might get the nod. Will he win? Will he?
Yeah.
I don't think. Will he win the seat? It's tough to say.
Yeah, that was what I was curious about. Will there be name recognition? Because last year I spent 2 weeks in Brampton, and I got to see what the actual makeup of Brampton is. And I would hope that his name recognition would carry him out. So, I mean, that may be one to count on. I think he would have had a better chance if Mamo would have ran for the PCs there, but I guess that's not happening now.
No, I don't think Mama Leader's doing that. But again, I mean, you having been there now, you know why. And this is probably going to sound racist, but I'm going to say it anyway because I grew up in the area. But now you know why they call it Bangladesh, right?
Yes,
I mean,
indeed.
It's pretty obviously a South Asian community. Pretty obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me.
And the other thing about that
reminds me. No, it reminds me of Surrey, British Columbia.
Votes. Oh, absolutely. And let's face it, those people vote, right?
Yes,
Nobody
they do.
votes
they
more
get
often
involved.
than a new Canadian. New Canadians vote. I mean, who's going to cost whoever wins the election? People who've been here for a generation or more. People who are so sick of the system they don't vote anymore. That's who's going to drive this election.
Well, it should be interesting because, basically what I'm seeing is the PCs are going to campaign on we have to have change and we're the only ones who can provide it. Wynne is going to campaign on think about what they're going to do. And this is what we want to do. And then we have the NDP with she's not doing enough and he's crazy. And I really don't.
They're not doing enough.
They have no position of their own.
They're not doing enough. They're not doing enough, and he's out of his friggin' mind. Yes.
I mean, that's just not tenable. That's not going to change anybody's mind on any level, whether it's the feelings level or the fact level. That's not going to change any minds.
So what you may see is lower voter turnout this time around. which would be sad.
That's always sad. Do you see the possibility of a minority government?
I do, actually. That is one thing I do see, and it would be a minority NDP Liberal government. I don't know if the NDP would be in the driver's seat, but I do definitely see. I mean, we're going to see similar to what happened with David Peterson and Bob Rae, where Bob Rae's NDP propped him up. Now, Andrea Horwath probably doesn't want to do that. She was, because of course they said that she did that when McGuinty was first elected, right? That's what the NDP were doing, because the McGuinty government got a pretty slim majority, right?
Yeah.
But they've been in the catbird seat ever since. I think the problem with the NDP is they don't want to do that, because if they do that, the chances of winning the next election are pretty bad. Because everyone would be like, well, what's the point of you're just going to prop up the Liberals? I might as well just vote Liberal. Although, as I pointed out, when they were propping up the Liberals under Peterson, they were the ones who ended up forming government afterwards. But of course, the Liberals under Peterson sabotaged their own campaign, so that's a different story altogether.
No, but I think there is some basis in that. I mean, we've seen that over the years on the federal level. There's been some very large national programs that people now take for granted that only happened because the NDP demanded they be put in, or we're going to let your government fall.
Mm-hmm.
So you can play that to advantage. I think Andrew Weaver's having a much harder time than he thought, whatever the hell's going on in BC. But I hope that the TV debates bring some new discourse to this, because the writ hasn't even dropped, but yet I feel this getting a little stale already. Do you feel that way?
Not really. No. I get, but I think, I mean, I know where you're coming from on that, because of course are probably already getting tired of hearing Doug Ford stories, right? I mean, that's what's making it stale. Andrea Horwath's not running around. I mean, once the budget came down, that was it. They've defended the budget, but we only had their first debate was today, right? Which Ford didn't bother to show up. But no, I don't think it's getting stale yet. I mean, we're barely out of the blocks, as you said. We don't even have all our candidates yet. So.
Alrighty. So, what do you expect? The only other wild card I see, Glenn, and I think this is a genuine wild card, is the Trillium Party of Ontario. I think the Trillium Party of Ontario has a really good chance at decimating some of the Conservative ridings, just because of what's been going on with the Conservatives provincially. I mean, Doug Ford can say whatever he says. Vic Fideli can say he got rid of the rot, but they just lost another candidate today, right? Mm-hmm. Yesterday, rather, Michael Harris. Who suffered the scorn of another complaint about sexual misconduct. So, I mean, as long as there's the possibility of that specter, I think the Trillium Party could come up. I think the Trillium Party could make some inroads. We could see some movement there. But I also think the Trillium Party's candidates could undermine some of the PC candidates. Okay. Well, good. I mean, not to be biased, but I mean, I just like the idea of more parties being competitive everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really what's happening in this day and age, unfortunately. But until Queen's Park rises, until the legislature is dissolved, is there really anything that's going to happen at Queen's Park, or are they just going through the motions and looking at their watches?
I think they're probably looking at their watches. Although there's still a lot of work being done at committees, though, I should point out. Still a lot of work being done at committees, and also fleshing out how some of these programs they've proposed are going to come to fruition as well. So, I mean, as far as question period goes and sitting in the ledge, voting on legislation, I don't think we're going to see a lot of legislation move forward, but we are seeing a lot of work at committee.
Okay. At least some people there are earning their money still. That's good to know. Now, I invite you now at this time, Dave, to tell everyone where they can listen to your holistic show weekdays.
Well, thank you for that, Glenn, and thanks for letting me be on the show this evening with you again. My show airs weekdays, Monday to Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time from 4 to 7 p.m. I'm on 3 hours every single day, Monday to Friday, where we offer special features throughout the week. It is available at Northumberland 89.7. So if you're in the Coburg area, East Northumberland, you're going to listen to it at 89.7. If you're listening on the World Wide Web, you go to northumberland897.ca. You click the Listen Live button, and you can also sign in through the Radio Player app. We've partnered with Radio Player recently, and so the app is now the Radio Player app. And that's how you can listen to us anywhere on the planet. And I want to thank you for inviting me, as I say. But we have listeners from Texas, California, Florida, yourself. I know you've listened on occasion. People in Great Britain who listen to me, believe it or not. So we do have a worldwide audience, and I'm very proud of that. And the reason I call myself Canada's only holistic political chat is because, as I mentioned earlier, I believe in the interconnectedness of all things political. I think just like Dirk Gently, the holistic detective, I believe in the interconnectedness of all things, especially all things political. What's happening in Syria right now will have an effect on your day-to-day in Edmonton or your day-to-day in Coburg. It does. It's just a reality. Those things do affect us each and every day, and that's why I do my show.
Well, there's a lot of logic and a lot of, I should listen. What the hell does he mean? So, yeah, right on. Thank you very much, Dave. And I guess we'll see what happens as the road keeps going to June 7th. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to your listeners.
All right. Good night.
Good night, Glenn.
All righty. Thank you, Dave Glover. Wanted to end with a few minutes left in the 2-hour window. This episode tonight is officially Season 8, Episode 20. On Wednesday, August 15th, 2014, The View Up Here had Season 1, Episode 1. Next week, April 18th, there will be no show. April 25th will be Season 9, Episode 1, as The View Up Here somehow goes into its 5th year. The guest for Season 9 premiere will be Stephen Lawtons. Looking forward to having Mr. Lawtons back. I believe it will be his 7th appearance on The View Up Here. And I have no problem with that, and I'm sure regular listeners won't either. I look forward to having him on. Oh, sorry, I got distracted by chat. All righty, that's it for tonight. Imagine the possibilities. Ontario is going to get interesting, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it as we get closer on The View Up Here. Stephen Lawtons is an Ontarian, you know. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the Season 9 premiere of The View Up Here. Good night.